Hey there, fellow growers. If you've ever tried cultivating mushrooms and wondered why these fascinating fungi seem so finicky about their food, you're definitely not alone. I've spent countless hours in my grow room scratching my head, trying to figure out why my mushrooms would devour one substrate like it was gourmet cuisine while completely ignoring another that seemed nearly identical. Today we're diving deep into the peculiar eating habits of mushrooms, and trust me, understanding this will completely transform your mushroom growing success. Here's the first mind-bending truth. Mushrooms don't have mouths, stomachs, or anything resembling a digestive system as we know it. Instead, they're essentially the fruiting bodies of a vast underground network called mycelium, which feeds by secreting powerful enzymes directly into whatever material it's growing on. Think of it like pouring digestive juices onto your dinner plate and absorbing the pre-digested nutrients through your skin. Sounds wild, right? But this unique feeding method is exactly why mushrooms are so incredibly selective about what they'll grow on. The mycelium releases these enzymes to break down complex organic compounds into simpler molecules it can absorb. Different mushroom species have evolved to produce different enzyme cocktails, which means each species has become specialized to break down specific types of organic matter. This specialization is the root cause of their pickiness, and it's absolutely critical for us growers to understand. One of the biggest reasons mushrooms seem so particular is their obsession with the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio in their substrate. Most gourmet mushrooms prefer a ratio somewhere between 20:1 and 40:1, with the sweet spot varying by species. Get this ratio wrong, and your mushrooms will either refuse to colonize, grow slowly, or produce disappointing flushes. When I first started growing oyster mushrooms, I made the classic beginner mistake of thinking more nitrogen meant faster growth. I supplemented my straw substrate heavily with blood meal, bringing that nitrogen content way up. The result? Contamination city. The excess nitrogen created the perfect environment for bacteria and mold, but my oyster mycelium struggled to compete. I learned the hard way that mushrooms have spent millions of years evolving to thrive on specific ratios, and we can't just override that with our assumptions. Sheatakes, for example, absolutely love hardwood substrates with their naturally balanced carbon-to-nitrogen profile. Try growing them on a nitrogen-rich, manure-based substrate like you might use for button mushrooms, and you'll be disappointed. This isn't stubbornness on the mushroom's part. It's simply that shiitake mycelium produces enzymes specifically designed to break down lignin and cellulose in hardwood, not the proteins and simpler compounds in manure. Here's another area where mushrooms show their picky side: moisture levels. Most mushroom substrates need to be at what we call field capacity, meaning roughly 60 to 65% moisture content. Squeeze a handful and a few drops should come out, but it shouldn't be dripping wet. Go too dry, and the mycelium can't transport nutrients efficiently. Go too wet, and you've created an anaerobic environment where beneficial aerobic mushroom mycelium suffocates while harmful anaerobic bacteria thrive. I remember setting up a batch of pink oyster mushrooms during a particularly humid summer week. The substrate felt perfect when I mixed it, but honestly, I didn't account for the additional moisture it would absorb from the humid air during colonization. The result was, well, a soggy, sour-smelling mess that never fully colonized. Mushrooms taught me that day that they know exactly what they need, and even slight deviations from their preferences can derail an entire grow. Mushrooms are equally particular about pH levels. Most prefer slightly acidic conditions, typically between 5.5 and 6.5 on the pH scale. This preference isn't arbitrary, it's about competitive advantage. At these pH levels, mushroom mycelium thrives, while many competing organisms struggle. It's like the mushrooms have built-in security systems that favor their growth over potential contaminants. When you're pasteurizing straw or preparing hardwood sawdust, the natural pH is usually in the right range, but if you start adding supplements or using unusual substrate materials, you can easily push the pH outside the mushroom's comfort zone. I once tried growing lion's mane on a substrate that included some composted material with a pH hovering around 7.5. The mycelium grew, but painfully slowly, and the yields were disappointing. A simple pH adjustment on my next batch made all the difference. Here's something that surprised me when I was learning mushrooms care deeply about the physical structure of their food. The particle size of your substrate affects gas exchange, moisture retention, and how easily mycelium can colonize the material. Too fine, and you risk creating compacted anaerobic pockets. Too coarse, and there's inadequate surface area for the mycelium to attach and not enough moisture retention. For sawdust-loving mushrooms like shiitake or reishi, you want particles that are roughly the consistency of fine sawdust to small wood chips. For oyster mushrooms on straw, chopping that straw into 2 to 3 inch pieces creates the ideal structure. This Goldilocks zone of particle size ensures proper airflow, while maintaining enough contact points for thorough colonization. Temperature is another area where mushrooms reveal their selective nature. Different species have evolved in different climates and ecosystems, and those temperature preferences are hardwired. Oyster mushrooms come in varieties suited for everything from cool cellars to tropical conditions. Try growing a cold-loving blue oyster at warm temperatures, and you'll get thin, leggy mushrooms with poor texture. Conversely, grow a pink oyster in cold conditions, and it simply won't fruit. The pickiness extends beyond just fruiting temperatures too. Colonization temperatures, spawn run temperatures, and fruiting temperatures can all be different for the same species. Lion's mane, for instance, colonizes well at 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit but prefers to fruit at cooler temperatures around 60 to 65 degrees. This specificity means we need to provide different conditions at different growth stages. Now, before you feel overwhelmed by all these requirements, here's the beautiful paradox. This pickiness is actually what makes mushroom cultivation possible for us homegrowers. Because mushrooms are so specialized, once you dial in the exact conditions for your chosen species, they'll consistently outcompete random contaminants. Their selectivity becomes your competitive advantage. When you provide the perfect substrate composition, moisture level, pH, particle size, and temperature, your chosen mushroom species will colonize aggressively and defend its territory. I've seen properly prepared substrates resist contamination even in less than sterile conditions, simply because the mushroom mycelium was so perfectly suited to those conditions that nothing else could establish a foothold. The key to successful mushroom cultivation isn't fighting against their picky nature, it's embracing it. So, research your specific species thoroughly. Understand what substrates they prefer in nature, what temperature ranges they thrive in, and what conditions trigger fruiting. Then, just try to replicate those conditions as closely as possible. I've found that keeping detailed grow logs has been invaluable. Note your substrate recipes, moisture content, colonization times, contamination rates, and yields. Over time, you'll develop an intuitive understanding of what each species needs, and that pickiness that once frustrated you becomes a reliable roadmap to consistent success. Remember, mushrooms have been perfecting their dietary preferences for hundreds of millions of years. They're not being difficult, they're being efficient. They've evolved to excel in specific niches, and when we honor those preferences, they reward us with abundant, healthy flushes of delicious, nutritious mushrooms. So next time your mushrooms seem to be refusing a perfectly good substrate, don't take it personally. They're just telling you something's not quite right. Listen to them, adjust accordingly, and watch your cultivation skills grow right alongside your mushrooms.